This scandal affecting the company Nestlé Waters, the group that produces Vittel, Contrex, and also Hepar water. You can't call that milk, it's something else.
We know that the Elysée knew. We know that from 2022 they are aware of the case. They know that illegal treatment methods are being used in the Nestlé group factories. That's very clear.
It's December 2023 in Vergès, in the Gard region. An official from the regional health agency has just finished 6 months of work on a health report. He analyzed the contaminated springs. He ordered laboratory analyses and documented everything carefully. Fecal bacteria in the wells, pesticides that have been banned for years, forever chemicals. His report is thorough. He puts down his pen, signs it, and sends it to his superiors. 2 weeks later, he receives a new version of the document. The names of the bacteria have disappeared. The mentions of pesticides have been removed, and paragraphs praising Nestlé have been added instead. His superiors explain to him that these changes were cleared with the president of Nestlé Waters. Shocked, he withdraws his signature. He refuses to have his name appear on this document. And above all, he raises the alarm. But no one listens to him. Remember him well because he will be important to our story. And while our official tries to understand what's happening, millions of French people appear. They quietly buy their bottles of Perrier, Vittel, and Contrex, thinking they're making the right choice for their health. But then, how could a company that has presented itself for 150 years as the one that feeds the world well, contaminate its own springs for 15 years without anyone stopping it? How did a fraud estimated at 3 billion euros get settled with a fine of only 2 million euros? And how could ministries, prefects, and health agencies alter official reports at the request of a Swiss multinational? Hi, Team Mindset. I hope you're doing well. Today, we're taking on Nestlé, the company that's been the subject of the longest boycott in global business history, and you'll quickly understand why. In 1866, in Vevey, Switzerland, a small town on the shores of Lake Geneva, Henri Nestlé is a German pharmacist who fled political repression to settle in Switzerland. He notices something that deeply troubles him. Thousands of infants die every year in Europe. They're not sick, but in his eyes, it's even worse. They're suffering from malnutrition. Their mothers can't breastfeed, and there is no reliable substitute for breast milk. So he will spend years in his laboratory mixing cow's milk, and sugar until he finds a formula that works. The first use of his farine lactée saves the life of a 15-day-old premature infant, whom the local doctors had completely given up on. For Henri Nestlé, that's the meaning of his work, saving lives. After years of improving his products, he sells his company in 1875 for 1 million Swiss francs and retires. He would die in 1890 without ever knowing what his name would become, because what followed he hadn't foreseen. In a century and a half, the company that bears his name would acquire hundreds of brands, establish itself in 186 countries, and become the world leader in the food industry. Even though in 2025, for the first time in a long while, the giant starts to lose ground. But we'll come back to that later. Before that, I'd like to ask you a question. How many Nestlé products do you have at home? Right now, sometimes without even knowing it, I'd say at least 3 products. Nestlé's Nescafé, Nespresso, Kit Kat, Erta, Maggi, Purina, Gigos, Nesquik, Smarties, Lion, Buitoni, Chocapic, Cheerios. And that's not all. For water, we have Perrier, Vittel, Contrex, Hepar, San Pellegrino, Aquapana. All of that is Nestlé, a Swiss company that most French people think is French. The company's slogan is good food, good life. Good food, good life. Henri Nestlé would no doubt have been proud of that. Except that, as you might have guessed, things aren't that rosy. Behind this slogan, there's a series of scandals spanning 50 years. And the first one, the most serious, the most shocking, goes back to the 1970s. And it involves African infants. It's the 1960s in a maternity ward in Senegal. A woman has just given birth. A nurse in a white coat approaches and hands her a bottle. It's better for your baby. The woman trusts her and stops breastfeeding. The problem is that woman wasn't a nurse. She was a Nestlé saleswoman. Nestlé has dominated this market from the very beginning. And with Africa developing at a rapid pace and African cities growing, Nestlé sees a huge market. Millions of mothers who could buy its powdered milk. Except there's a fundamental problem that the company chooses deliberately to ignore. Selling powdered milk in Europe and selling powdered milk in Africa are not at all the same thing. In Europe, mothers have access to clean water. They can read the instructions. They can afford to buy the product regularly. In Africa at that time, that wasn't the case for the majority. Illiteracy rates were high and many families lived in great poverty. But what Nestlé did anyway was send saleswomen dressed in white coats to African maternity wards to hand out free samples of powdered milk. You get it? The idea was to make them look like nurses. The mothers would trust them and stop breastfeeding.
You know that using these products, when they're not used properly, can be dangerous. So, do you feel at all responsible for what might happen?
We feel responsible to the extent that it's possible for a company, in the sense that we put products on the market that are of very high quality, products that are specially formulated. We put a lot of effort into creating labels that are clear, that inform mothers about usage and about the dangers.
Many mothers who cannot read.
That's exactly why we developed pictograms that in these situations can help the mother use this product correctly. It goes further. Let's not forget that in most cases, these mothers do not decide on their own to use these products. They are advised by the healthcare systems, by pediatricians.
You could be influencing the pediatrician.
We influence the pediatrician who knows very well that the mother needs this product. We influence the pediatrician by telling him, this is what we can offer. This is what might be applicable in this or that situation.
The problem is that once she gets home, the free sample is finished. And since breastfeeding has been interrupted, natural lactation has stopped. The family has to buy powdered formula, but of course, they can't always afford it. And so they will dilute the powder to save money. This causes malnutrition, which will become severe. And to prepare the bottle, they use the available water, which is often contaminated. This causes massive diarrhea, and so infants will die.
It is estimated that more than 1 million children each year are victims of all kinds of breast milk substitutes or improper use with serious consequences.
In 1974, a British report published by the NGO War on Want was titled The Baby Killer. It directly implicated Nestlé. Nestlé's reaction was to sue the authors of the report for defamation. The company technically won, but the judge publicly noted that Nestlé could fundamentally change its advertising methods. It's a moral victory for the plaintiffs. In 1977, an international boycott was launched in the United States, where the report caused the biggest stir.
It's a battle, one of the great battles of the second half of the 20th century. You could even say it's a war because it lasted 6 years. A fierce war between Nestlé on one side and consumer advocacy groups on the other, backed by churches, who boycotted for 6 years in different countries around the world, especially in the United States and Europe, all the products of this company, and there are many of these products since it's the leading multinational in the food industry. So, according to Jean-Claude Buffel, this boycott, which ended in 1984, was very damaging. Nestlé lost a lot in the process actually, something like $3 billion.
It will spread to dozens of countries. And in 1984, under pressure, Nestlé signed an agreement with the WHO and committed to following a strict marketing code. The boycott was lifted, but 4 years later, IBFN published a new report. Nestlé violated the code it had just signed. It flooded health centers in developing countries with free samples, exactly as before. The boycott resumed and it would never stop again. The boycott of Nestlé, launched in 1977, is today the longest-running corporate boycott in the history of global business. Almost 50 years, still active in several countries and supported by thousands of organizations around the world. But the craziest thing is that, contrary to what you might think, a brand can survive a scandal. Nestlé has made it a tradition. And to make sure you understand that this isn't a story from the past, in 2024, the Swiss NGO Public Eye revealed that Cerelac infant cereals sold by Nestlé in 20 African countries contain up to 7.5 grams of added sugar per serving. In Switzerland, the same product is sold without added sugar. In 2025-19, African organizations published an open letter asking Nestlé to stop these practices. 50 years after the white coats in African maternity wards, Nestlé is still selling 2 different products depending on whether you are rich or poor. One for the markets that are paying attention, one for those that are not. But the baby scandal, as huge as it is only part of the story. Because Nestlé also decided to do the same thing with something much more fundamental. Something you drink every day and about which its own CEO had some very particular ideas. Nestlé is the world's biggest bottled water producer. Perrier, Vittel, you know the list, I've mentioned it before. A water empire built on a very simple promise. Bottled water is naturally pure. You pay for purity at the source. Except that to understand how Nestlé thinks about water, you have to know Peter Brabeck. Peter was the CEO of Nestlé from 1997 to 2008. He's an Austrian who began as an ice cream truck salesman in South America and worked his way to the top of the empire. And in 2005, in an Austrian documentary called Feed the World, he expressed a conviction in front of a camera. He says that the idea that access to water is a fundamental human right is an extreme position advocated by NGOs. And that for him, water should have a market value like any other food commodity.
If we do not give a value to the water, those investments are not going to be made because nobody has an interest to invest because you don't have an economic return.
The video goes around the world. Nestlé will spend years explaining that the comments were taken out of context. Brabeck later claims he never meant to suggest basic drinking water shouldn't be available to all. Yet while denying this, here's what Nestlé was actually doing then. In the Vosges, the factory that produces Vittel, Contrex, and Épargne has been pumping the local groundwater for decades. The water table has dropped by 10 meters in 40 years. The annual deficit is about 1 million cubic meters. And the cruel irony in this story is that in the summer, tanker trucks come to supply water. The water that flows beneath their feet is in bottles for 1.5 euros at the supermarket. But the worst part is that all this time, Nestlé wasn't pumping safe water. They were pumping water that was becoming contaminated. And rather than slowing down production, since you're starting to know their methods, guess what they did? They found a way to make the problem disappear in official reports, of course. That's where we come back to the official from GARD I mentioned at the beginning. It's January 30, 2024. Le Monde and the investigation unit of Radio France publish an investigation that will change everything. Hold on, because if you drank Nestlé water during that time, it's crazy. Journalists report that since at least 2005, nearly 20 years, Nestlé has used banned filtration processes on its mineral waters. Activated carbon filtration, ultraviolet treatment, fine microfiltration. The same process is used to treat tap water. Why? Because the sources of Perrier, Vittel, Contrex, and Hepar are contaminated. Fecal bacteria, pesticides that have been banned for years. PFAS, those chemical pollutants called forever chemicals because they accumulate in the human body. Nestlé treats its water like tap water and sold it as natural mineral water. Over billions of bottles for almost 20 years, the fraud is estimated at more than 3 billion euros by government agencies. And guess the fine that Nestlé negotiated with the Epinal prosecutor's office to close the preliminary investigation? Well, if you were paying attention, I already mentioned the amount. 2 million euros. That's 0.07% of the damages. But let's get back to our civil servant from GARD. When he writes his report in December 2023, the case hasn't broken out publicly yet. What he writes about fecal bacteria in the risky wells, the pesticides, the recommendation to consider stopping production, it's explosive. The director of ARS Occitanie, which is the state agency responsible for monitoring public health in the south of France, gets a call from the president of Nestlé Waters one weekend. On Monday, he sends an email to the Ministry of Health's office. This email will be made public by the Senate report from May 2025. It says, I spoke with the president of Nestlé Waters this weekend to validate the document together, so there is no longer an issue. I also asked her for their talking points for the next steps. The talking points written by Nestlé are included in an official health report from the French government. The Senate report from May 2025, after 6 months of investigation and more than 70 hearings, will conclude that this is both an industrial scandal and a political scandal. The Élysée had been informed since 2022 and the Ministry of Industry since 2021. Several ministries and a prefect agreed to have the health reports altered at Nestlé's request. A judicial investigation is opened in 2025. The trial was held in Nancy in March 2026. Nestlé pleaded for acquittal. The verdict is expected on May 27. And today, millions of bottles of Perrier are still on supermarket shelves labeled as natural mineral water, some of them accompanied by a note that Nestlé was forced to add. It says that these bottles may not qualify as natural mineral water. In other words, Nestlé sells natural mineral water and at the same time admits that it might not be natural mineral water. We can agree, that makes no sense at all. Putting bottles labeled as natural mineral water, but at the same time specifying that it might not actually be. But still, there must be some justice, some kind of karma. Little by little, the consequences are starting to be felt. In 2024, Nestlé's revenue declined for the first time in several years. In 2025, it drops again, slightly, but it falls to 89 billion Swiss francs. Consumers are finally being heard, and the brand image is crumbling. For the first time in a long while, people are questioning if the empire is truly invincible. Here is the business lesson from this story. Nestlé has thrived for 150 years by selling one thing: trust. Not water or milk, but trust. And today, that trust is beginning to crack. Revenue is declining, and it's not because of competition or the economy, but because consumers found out. The question for you is, what are you selling? Could you stand by it out in the open? Henri Nestlé invented a product to save lives. The empire that bears his name chose something else, and today it's starting to pay the price. Unlike Picard, the frozen food specialist founded by someone who wanted to make life easier for the French, weathered France's biggest food scandal and survived vulture funds trying to strip it for parts before becoming the French people's favorite company, as shown in the video on screen.